Chapter 3. The Deep Dark. The deeper passages had no proper measure. Later, when Adam tried to remember the first years of his life, he would remember them as textures before he remembered them as places. Cold seeping through wool. Stone damp against the side of his face when he leaned where he should not have leaned. The grainy softness of old blankets dried too many times beside smokeless coals. The hollow differences in sound from chamber to chamber, teaching him long before he had language that some rooms were small enough to hold a whisper and some were large enough to lose one. The underwaist became his first world because there was no other world safe enough to give him. The old man's name was Oren. Adam learned that first because the midwife used it when she was angry. Oren, if you leave that bucket there again, I will break your stick and throw both halves after you. Then I'll be forced to limp louder, Oren replied, and Adam, perhaps 3 years old then, perhaps younger, laughed from where he sat wrapped in blankets near the brazier. The midwife's name was Selah. She had not invited him to call her anything. He did it one winter morning when she lifted him out of bed half asleep to check the fever in his neck. And after that the name simply remained, as if he had found the seam in her sternness and slipped through it. His mother was Mara. That name lived closest to his body. It meant warmth and hunger eased, and the smell of dried thyme in her sleeves from the bundles she hung near their sleeping place. It meant one hand always reaching for him in the dark before she had fully woken, checking the shape of him by touch. It meant the low voice that told stories without endings because endings felt too much like doors closing. The passages themselves had other names, though Adam did not always understand them. The rook stair, the root hall, the salt room, the old mouth, the blind arch, names not made for beauty, but for orientation and warning. Not past the old mouth alone, Selah would tell him. Why? Because I said so. Why? Because the floor changes there. He would accept that answer only because in the underwaist floors really did change. A safe path one season could sweat treachery the next. Stone shifted. Water found new seams. Old mortar gave up and became sand underfoot. The hill had never been entirely finished becoming itself. Their refuge occupied 3 linked chambers, and a stretch of corridor widened over generations into something almost domestic. There were pallets set into recesses in the walls, shelves cut directly into stone, and a cooking niche vented through a crack that lost smoke somewhere in the upper hill. A table made from salvaged planks stood at the center of the largest room, its legs uneven on the old floor. Oren had wedged one side with flat chips of shale until it rocked only if Adam leaned on it with all his strength. He often did. It was the first object in the world that felt solid enough to resist him. Above, somewhere beyond many turns of passage and several hidden doors, the sanctuary house still stood under ordinary use. Villagers came for herbs, for birthing help, for old records and sanctioned prayers to ease storms, bless fields, or bury their dead. Selah continued much of her work there with the careful expression of a woman who had never hidden a forbidden child in her life. Mara only emerged rarely, wrapped and hooded, always by night. Oren disappeared for days at a time along ways Adam was not allowed to know, then returned with sacks of grain, scraps of news, and the smell of weather on his cloak. No one told Adam at first why he could not go with them. They tried gentler forms first. It is too cold above. It is muddy. There are dogs. You are small. He took these explanations as children take all explanations, as temporary inconveniences imposed by adults who had failed to understand the importance of what he wanted. When he was 4, he staged his first rebellion by waiting until Mara slept after a long night of coughing and then slipping barefoot down the root hall with a stolen lamp wick and the hard confidence of the beloved. He reached the stair leading upward before anyone caught him. It rose in a tight spiral within the hill, old stone steps worn into shallow cups by feet long dead. Adam climbed 12 steps and saw, above him, a square of pale silver light the size of a plate. It was the first daylight he remembered. Not lamplight, not the blue cold glow of sanctioned lines glimpsed once or twice from hiding when Selah carried him past sealed upper doors. This was softer and wider and did not seem to come from any single thing. It simply existed overhead, patient and impossible. He stood frozen beneath it. The square brightened as a cloud must have moved outside. A sound came with it. Wind, though he had not yet learned the word. Wind and, beneath it, a bird calling somewhere far beyond stone. Adam took another step. Hands caught him under the arms and lifted him clean off the stair. He thrashed at once, more furious from fright than from any clear desire for freedom. No! No! Sela carried him down the spiral backward, her grip iron-hard. Are you trying to die, stupid? I wanted to see. You wanted to be seen. The difference meant nothing to him then. It struck his ear only as adult cruelty, a sentence shaped to deny him pleasure. He kicked at her apron and earned himself a sharper hold. Back in the main chamber, she set him on the table and stood over him, breathing hard. Mara had risen from her pallet, white with alarm. Oren came in from the salt room at the far end with his staff in one hand and a knife in the other before he saw there was no intruder. What happened? Mara asked. Your son tried to climb into the open like a rabbit with a death wish. Adam, still shaking with the stolen sight of daylight, shouted the only truth he knew. You never let me go anywhere. Mara's face changed. Not anger first. Hurt. That hurt confused him more than if she had struck him. Sela opened her mouth, closed it, and stepped away from the table. Then tell him, she said to Mara, at least enough to make him fear what should be feared. Fear was not hard to teach in the underways. It was the vocabulary of the place. But the fear Adam learned that morning never took the exact shape they intended. Mara sat opposite him and took both his hands in hers. He noticed, because children notice everything that matters physically, that her fingers had gone cold. There are men above, she said. Bad men. All men are above. A shadow of a smile touched her mouth and vanished. Yes, but these are the kind who look and keep looking once they have seen a thing. The kind who remember. Adam glanced toward the stair despite himself. What would they do? Mara's fingers tightened. They would take you away. Why? This was the question he asked most and understood least, because the adults around him each answered it differently. Because you are dangerous, Sela said from the hearth. No, Mara said immediately. Because they think he is, Sela corrected, not sounding sorry. Oren, leaning on his staff now that the alarm had passed, gave the table leg a nudge with one boot until it settled back onto its wedges. Because the world likes its boxes filled, he said. And he was born shaped wrong for one. Adam looked from one to the other and learned, without knowing he was learning it, that truth could enter a room broken into different pieces depending on whose mouth it used. This happened often. By 5, he knew there were names never to be spoken in upper rooms and passages never to be discussed if strangers were near. He knew the difference between Sela's working silence, Mara's frightened silence, and Oren's listening silence, which had nothing to do with people in the room and everything to do with the weight of the hill around them. He also knew hunger. Not starvation, they prevented that, but the disciplined, wearing hunger of hidden living. Supplies came late. Meat went bad in thaw seasons. Winter narrowed every calculation until meals became thin soups and black bread cut carefully enough that no one looked selfish taking their share. Adam grew fast in spite of it, all elbows and watchfulness, his body forever reaching half an inch beyond what the week's provisions had prepared for. He hated those seasons. Hunger made the adults short with one another. It made Sela's kindness disappear first, as if kindness were a luxury like honey. It made Mara give Adam part of her portion when she thought no one was looking. It made Oren vanish longer between returns and come back with new bruises around the wrists and the old excuse that he had slipped on an outer path. Adam stopped believing that by 6. Who hit you? He asked one night, staring at the purple finger shapes along Oren's forearm. The old man blew on his soup. A door. Doors don't have thumbs. Sela made a sound that might have been a laugh if she had permitted herself one. Mara looked away too quickly. Oren met Adam's eyes across the table. There are questions that keep men alive, he said, and questions that teach other people where to put the knife. Adam stored the words away. He did not understand them fully. He understood enough. He learned other things too, things no one meant to teach him. The walls sometimes changed when he was alone. Not visibly. Not like moving stone in a story. but the feel of a chamber could alter in his presence. A room that usually held sound close might begin to cast his own breathing back at him from farther away. The lamp flame might lean from stillness into attention. The sealed water jars on the shelf sometimes sweated in a sudden ring when he passed beneath them, though the air remained cold. Once, hiding beneath the table after a scolding, he pressed both palms to the floor in childish fury and felt, unmistakably felt, something below the stone answer, not with words but with a slow immense awareness, as if the hill had opened one buried eye and then shut it again. He yanked his hands away and did not touch the floor deliberately for the rest of the day. That night he dreamed of a vast black place under the underways. There were no torches in it, yet he could see, not because the darkness lessened, but because it had layers, and each layer knew itself against the next. Far away, something stood or slept or waited. He could not tell which. It had no human outline, felt older than shape. When he woke, the dream remained with him only as a pressure behind his ribs and the certainty that if he listened too hard, something might listen back. He did not tell Mara. He did not tell Sela or Oren either. By then he had begun to grasp that adults feared some truths more than they feared being lied to. The first time he understood that other children lived differently was the year Sela allowed him to watch through a slit-stone vent into the upper storeroom while village families gathered in the sanctuary court for first weaving. He was nearly 7. Old enough, she judged, to understand envy without shouting it. Through the narrow opening he saw boots in snow, hemmed cloaks, mothers bending over infants wrapped in white, fathers standing too straight with ritual pride. Blue lamps had been hung under the court awning, and the order's local speaker traced blessing forms in the air above each child. Adam could not hear every word, but he heard enough. Belonging, measure, gift, right placement, grace received. At one point, the speaker touched a baby's chest with a silver instrument very like the one the witness had used on Adam at birth. This one chimed sweetly. The gathered families smiled with relief so visible it felt like heat. Adam drew back from the vent. "That's what happens?" he asked. Sela, beside him in the dark storeroom, answered too slowly. "Yes." He thought about the silent instrument, the adults' faces in the birthing room he could not remember but somehow carried in his body all the same, the years underground, the stairs he must not climb, the watchers who might still be searching beyond the hill. "What happened to me?" Sela's hand, worn and blunt-fingered, closed around the back of his neck. It was not gentle, but it was not unkind either. "You were born alive," she said. "For now, learn to keep that skill." It was not enough. He knew it even then, but it was all she would give. As he grew, concealment hardened from circumstance into character. Adam learned to move quietly not because he was naturally graceful, but because clumsiness brought consequences too large for the cause. He learned to pause before entering a room, listening for tone as much as words. He learned that adults often said safer things with their shoulders than with their mouths. He learned to eat quickly, sleep lightly, and keep his temper hidden until it rose too fast to master. That happened more often as he neared 8. He was never docile. Hunger, confinement, and the permanent sense of being the cause of other people's caution had sharpened him rather than subdued him. There were days he hated the chambers, hated the low ceilings, hated the way the passages bent every line of sight into secrecy. He picked fights with absence because there was no one else to fight. He threw a bowl once hard enough to crack it against the wall and then cried in shame when Mara crouched to gather the pieces with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," he said over and over. "I know," she said, though her eyes were bright with exhausted tears. "I know you are. That was worse than punishment." He went to hide in the root hall and sat with his back against the cold wall until the heat of his anger leaked out into the stone. After a while Oren found him there. The old man settled himself beside Adam with the difficulty of age and did not speak at once. He simply sat, staff laid across his knees, both of them facing the dark bend of the passage. At last he said, "Do you know why cave lanterns burn longer than house lamps?" Adam wiped his nose on his sleeve. "No, because they learn from the dark. That doesn't mean anything. It means they stop trying to be sons." Adam frowned at the floor. I don't want to be a lamp. No, Oren said. You want to be what takes a hammer blow without ringing like everyone expects. Adam looked up at him sharply. What does that mean? Oren studied him for a long time before answering. It means you've been listening to yourself. That should have comforted him. Instead, it made the passage seem narrower. There were other signs, smaller but harder to dismiss. Adam could sense certain upper rooms through the stone long before he reached them. A corridor used recently by strangers felt different from one walked only by Sela or Mara. He would stop outside a sealed door and know, without hearing a thing, whether someone waited beyond it. Once, when Oren returned late and wounded more seriously than usual, Adam ran to the hidden entrance 3 turns before any footstep reached the chamber. Sela noticed. She was washing blood from Oren's side when she asked, too casually, "How did you know it was him?" Adam stood in the doorway with his fists clenched against the sight of so much red. "I heard him. You didn't." He hated when adults were certain about things inside his own body. "Then I felt him." Sela paused. The cloth in her hand dripped pink into the basin. Mara, crouched on the other side of Oren with needle and thread ready for stitching, looked up fast enough to prick her own finger. No one spoke. Oren, pale from pain, gave Adam a look so keen it might have cut timber. "What did you feel?" Adam wished at once he had said nothing. He searched for words and found only wrong ones. That it was him, not someone else. "By step?" asked Sela. "No." "By breath?" "No." The truth sat between them like an uncovered blade. Adam flinched from it and did what children and frightened creatures do alike. He turned anger outward to cover fear. "I don't know," he snapped. "I just knew." He left before they could stop him. Later that night, long after the wound had been closed and the chamber quieted, he woke to voices from the far table. The adults thought him asleep. "He's changing," Mara whispered. "He is growing," Sela said. "You know that is not what she means," said Oren. There was a long scrape of wood on stone. Someone sitting down heavily. Mara again, ragged now. "What if it starts in earnest? What would you have us do?" Sela asked. "Cut it out of him?" "No." "Then keep your voice down." Another silence. Oren said at last, "If he begins to hear the deep places clearly, we teach him not to answer. If the world above starts to hear him back." He did not finish. Adam lay in the dark with his eyes open and learned something colder than fear. There were things in him even they dreaded. The knowledge did not make him feel powerful. It made him feel alone. Yet not entirely alone, never entirely. That was the strange cruelty of those years. For all their secrecy and worry, they loved him with the exhausted, imperfect ferocity of people who had bet their lives on his continued breathing. Mara's hand still found him in sleep. Sela still tucked extra cloth around his feet when winter climbed through the cracks. Oren still carved him toys from rootwood when he returned from the outer paths. Animals mostly, thick-bodied and graceless, but sturdy enough to survive being hurled in frustration against a wall. It was this more than fear that kept Adam from becoming purely wild. He grew in the dark, but not without attachment. He learned to read from old prayer ledgers scraped clean and written over. He learned to count by inventorying sacks and jars. He learned where the safest stones lay warmest in winter and which turns of corridor carried whisper echoes from above. He learned not to ask why the world had chosen him for hiding when it seemed to welcome every other child openly into light. And because he learned not to ask, the question deepened. By the end of his 8th year, he could stand in the main chamber with his eyes closed and tell whether the upper weather was snow or rain by the taste of the air sinking through the vent cracks. He could tell when strangers crossed the sanctuary yard overhead because the rooms below took on a tense, listening stillness. He could tell when Mara was worried before she spoke because her footsteps shortened. He could tell when Oren lied because the old man's staff struck the floor a little too cleanly between sentences. Most of all, he could tell that the hill itself was not empty. Not haunted, not exactly. Not peopled by whispering dead or spirit things such as village tales like to breed in dark corners. The underways felt inhabited by structure older than speech, by waiting, by memory, by a kind of buried attention that never fully slept. Sometimes, on nights when even the adults were quiet, Adam would lie awake and press his palm flat to the stone beside his pallet. Cold met him there, then depth, and once in a long while, something so immense and distant that his body would go still before his mind understood why. Those were the nights he dreamed of blackness layered below blackness, and of a place beneath all shaped rooms where something nameless endured without needing any witness at all. When morning came, he said nothing. He dressed, ate, learned, obeyed when obedience cost less than resistance, resisted when it cost too much to swallow, and kept growing in the deep dark while the ordered world above continued to wait for the chance to find him.